I'm with Dr. Isaac Golden again, and I love our chats. This is session number 2. Welcome, Dr. Isaac Golden.
Thank you, Bess. Thank you.
Good to have you with us. And what I want to ask you today is the big picture of COVID. What do you think is the big picture, and what are you seeing?
That's a really, really good question. And it's one to which I don't have all the answers, and I don't believe anyone does. And certainly, depending where you look, mainstream media, various rabbit holes, fairly balanced information. For example, uh, I think that the Children's Health Defence group started by Robert Kennedy Jr. in America is one of the few sources that I tend to look at on a regular basis because, but they were started by lawyers. They tend to be pretty evidence-based. They're not bringing in a whole lot of extreme information, and therefore most of what they say, I think, or allowed to be said on their site, is evidence-based and therefore reliable. And in fact, in one of my recent posts, we talked about the Australians for Children's Health Defence, a group that's in contact on a regular basis with Kennedy's group in America, is being established in Australia. And if people want to find out a bit more, go back to that post done a couple of weeks ago, and there are links there to how you can connect with them. But back to your question, what is the big picture? Look, things like what is the origin of COVID? What are the schemes that certain people have put in place behind COVID? All of these things we've tended to avoid talking about in the Health Australia Party material that's been put out, simply because, one, no one can be completely certain of all of the cross connections, all of the implications of what's happening. And secondly, because we don't know the full picture, we would rather limit what we talk about to things that we do know. So, for example, the origin, was it started in a food market in Wuhan? Or was it something that was started in a laboratory there? Was the laboratory financed by Fauci's organization from America? All these things will be, in the fullness of time, written about, I've got no doubt, in books. There'll be movies, there'll be TV miniseries made of all of this stuff in years to come. Right now, we can't be completely certain. I mean, I can give you my personal view in terms of the origin. I heard a very distinguished, I think he was either Russian or East, or maybe a German professor, back in, it would have been March last year, talk about how he'd looked at the genomic sequencing of COVID and basically came to the conclusion that there were certain things in there which could never have been naturally produced. And then I've heard other very distinguished scientists say virtually the same thing. In fact, just recently, in the last few months, another internationally known and respected orthodox scientist came out and said virtually the same thing. When you look at the genomic sequencing of what we've got here, it's impossible for it to have been fully derived purely from nature. But once again, who's to say whether Fauci and his organization financed this gain of function research, as they call it, in Wuhan? And if that was correct, was it deliberately released or accidentally released? We don't know. But the big picture, the big picture we do know about, is that there is something, an infectious agent, which is mutating, which has caused very serious problems in certain areas. And because of the trips, let's talk about India, for example, because everyone's, talking about the Indian variant. because I've been to India 5 times, I've formed very close relationships with numbers of doctors over there, orthodox medical people, including people who are directing the health approaches for millions of people. Because remember, in India, they have the Ministry of Ayush, which is effectively the Ministry of Natural Medicine. Ayush stands for Ayurveda, the Y is yoga and naturopathy, U is Unani, S is Siddha, and H is homeopathy. So all of those natural modalities are now covered by a ministry within the national Indian government. And they have at the what's called the CCRH, the Central Council for Research in Homeopathy, over 1,000 people working for them across India. So we have a lot of information now coming back from India. And I know, speaking to my contacts there, this is no beat up. This is not a fudging of the figures. And in one of our other sessions, we're going to talk about statistics and the figures.
Yes.
But what we've seen in terms of hospitals being overwhelmed, about funeral pyres running out of wood because there's so many of them, all these sort of tragedies in certain areas are not fictitious. They're very real. And in fact, I had a very dear colleague of mine pass away the other day, not from COVID directly, but from a totally unexpected heart attack. Now, I'm just wondering to what extent shedding may be an issue from recently vaccinated people over there, because there's a lot of vaccines being used in India. In fact, India, and this might, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, India has the largest vaccine manufacturing group of companies on the planet.
Oh, wow.
And they make hundreds of millions of doses, but they also use natural medicine as well. So, I mean, India, of course, is the second largest country in the world. We're talking billions of people, not a few million like in Australia and other countries. So they have all the options there, but
well,
it's a real thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that they've got
Yep.
the two options. They've got the world's largest body for the natural therapies, and they've got the world's largest manufacturers of certain, vaccination companies as well, based in India. So it'd be interesting to see what does come out of India from both sides, the natural therapy side and the vaccination side. But you raised a good point about the shedding, and there is an equal population, I believe, here in WA, if not all of Australia, that have fears from both sides. We talked about fears in our first video. One is relating to the fear of the disease. They want the vaccine to save their life. And the other one is the fear of the vaccine because they think it's more deadly than the virus, and the fear of the shedding caused by the people that have taken the vaccine. So that I think may need its whole new video and whole new topic.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that? Is that real from what you've heard?
Absolutely. No, I'm getting patients in growing numbers with sudden symptoms that could only be explained by shedding. And if they're dealt with in a certain way, and I am limited in what I can necessarily say here, but if they're dealt with in a certain way and the people improve, the symptoms suddenly go, that definitely confirms that shedding was the picture. But what I've found in my clinical experience, and it's very new, this is all very new for us, Bas, there are 4 main areas where people are developing symptoms from being exposed to recently vaccinated individuals. The first one is neurological. There's a lot of pains in the body. Eye pain I've seen that a number of times. Pain on the skin, like severe electric shocks, severe neurological pains. Secondly, actual skin eruptions and discolorations, blotching, all that sort of stuff in the skin.
Blood clotting?
Hormonal issues. Well, we're coming to that. Hormonal issues are very significant particularly for women. So I've even had some menopausal women who have had vaginal bleeding, and certainly younger women who have a very, very regular menstrual cycle, having periods in between their normal cycles for no other reason, never happened before. And finally, cardiovascular. So this certainly does apply to clotting, but also chest pains of various sorts. They're the four main lots of symptoms that I've seen associated with shedding. But, you know, there are many others, including debility, including mental clarity or mood changes as well. But those other four are the ones that seem to be coming through. So it's a very, very real thing. And these sorts of things are being seen internationally. Once again, like we talked about in the last session, not reported in the mainstream media in Australia. But if you look at other medical reports internationally, you'll see more and more cases of shedding being reported.
Sure. And if they are reported on, they're very marginalized. 1 in 100,000, you know, 1 in a million. Rah, rah, rah.
Yeah, well, that's not true.
Exactly. It's a certain narrative that seems to be almost repeated throughout all these different channels. So again, just closing this session with the big picture in mind, it seems like we're only getting snippets of what we're allowed to see. You know, flatten the curve was the first snippet. All this new terminology that was introduced to us last year, like social distancing and all these different lockdown situations, quarantining healthy people, which has never been heard. So it's like snippets, but only, I guess, only God knows how far the big picture really looks and what we're allowed to see at each portion in time. I'm interested to cover things in the next sessions like lockdowns. Are they effective? Are they useful? And there's so much more we can cover in future sessions, but thank you so much for your time. And is there anything you want to share in closing for this session?
Yeah, look, in terms of the big picture, it really is difficult to narrow things down to just one or two things, because all of this is very new. And the main thing that I will keep coming back to, and people may get sick of hearing it from me, Bas, the main thing with the big picture is that the people running the response have refused to allow Australian citizens, and this is the same in other countries as well, to know about all of the options, all of the options available for both prevention and treating the disease. Because I know in this country, and we're talking about Australia as Australians, in this country, the burden of chronic illness, the debt burden, and the burden of mental illness caused by our overall approach to dealing with COVID has not been necessary. We could have done it differently if we'd been allowed to utilize all of the evidence-based and proven options available internationally. To me, that's the biggest picture of the lot. And the people responsible for that, I sincerely hope, will be held to account in due course.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. There's definitely a lot to unpack in future sessions about the political agendas behind this, the no risk mitigation across the board lockdown situation, and the damage that that's caused, the flow-on effect, as you say, on overwhelm with the mental health sector and so on. And damage to people's relationships and many, many other things, businesses being impacted by these lockdowns. Again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for watching to our viewers, and I look forward to our next session as always.